Imagine helping a stranger on a rainy day and finding out that stranger holds the secret to your entire past. She was just a little girl in a pink frock with golden curls, helping a man pick up scattered papers. But when the millionaire CEO saw the heirloom bracelet on her tiny wrist, his entire world stopped. What he discovered next will leave you speechless. Before we dive into this heart-melting story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now in your part of the world? Because no matter where you are, this story is going to reach your heart. Let's begin. The New York rain fell in delicate sheets, blurring the city's sharp edges into a watercolor haze as Ethan Blake stepped out of his black SUV, his sky blue tailored suit already speckled with droplets, his Bluetooth earpiece buzzing with boardroom tension he could no longer ignore, his eyes flicking down to the leather folder clutched in his hand, until a brutal gust of wind ripped the documents loose, sending pages flying like lost feathers onto the slick sidewalk. Puddles swallowing numbers, charts, and confidential secrets with heartless ease. He muttered a curse, dropping to his knees in frustration. But before he could gather even one, a tiny voice chimed through the rain like a fragile melody. "Mister, I'll help." So soft yet so certain it made him freeze. Blinking away the water clinging to his lashes, he turned and saw her, the most unexpected miracle in a city that had long stopped surprising him. A little girl, barely 6, golden curls bouncing with every careful step, her pink frock bright against the gray world, and a faded denim jacket clinging to her shoulders like a tiny warrior's armor. Her tiny hands scooped up his soaked documents with focused care, oblivious to the storm or the chaos. And as she handed him each page, one by one, her piercing blue eyes held his with an intensity that unnerved him, not because of their beauty, but because something in them felt painfully familiar, like a forgotten dream that suddenly returns without warning. "You missed this one," she said, offering the final sheet with a shy smile that made his chest tighten. And that's when he saw it, glinting just beneath the damp cuff of her jacket, a thin silver bracelet hugging her wrist like a secret. The same design, the same delicate pattern, the same engraving he thought he'd never see again. His family's heirloom, lost in tragedy, buried in grief. The last piece his sister ever wore before the fire consumed everything 6 years ago. The ground tilted, his breath caught, time suspended itself in the space between raindrops as he reached for her wrist but stopped, afraid to touch what he couldn't understand. "Where did you get this?" he asked, voice raw with something he couldn't name. Fear, hope, heartbreak. But the girl simply shrugged, twirling the bracelet like it was just any other shiny thing. Ethan's mind raced, images of his sister laughing in that very bracelet, holding her newborn daughter, flashes of flames, headlines, closed caskets, and unanswered questions, all crashing into the innocent face now staring at him with curiosity, not knowing she had just ripped open a wound he spent years trying to bury. She tilted her head, confused by his silence, then whispered, "Mommy says it's from someone special, from before I was born." And that one sentence fractured him, because the timeline fit, the eyes matched, and the bracelet, oh God, the bracelet was undeniable. His pulse pounded in his ears as 100 possibilities surged through him. Was she his niece? Had his sister somehow survived? Had she been hiding all along? And he suddenly realized his hands were shaking as he knelt there, drenched and overwhelmed, staring at a child who had no idea she had just set his world on fire. "What's your name?" he asked, barely managing the words. And when she answered, "Luna," his heart clenched with violent certainty, because that was the name his sister had whispered once, months before her death, when she dreamily spoke of her unborn daughter, the one no one ever got to meet. The weight of that name, spoken aloud after all these years, hit him like a freight train, and he struggled to breathe under the collapsing pressure of hope and horror mixing into something unbearable. Luna? She was real, she was alive, and she was standing in front of him in the middle of a rainy street like a ghost returned to flesh, completely unaware of the history coiled around her wrist or the storm she'd just awakened in the heart of a man who hadn't allowed himself to feel anything real in years. For a moment, he forgot the papers, forgot the call, forgot the empire waiting for his attention, because this child, this mysterious, golden-haired girl, held something far more valuable than stock reports or corporate deals. She held answers. She held blood. She held the truth. And as she smiled again and skipped back toward the edge of the sidewalk, humming a tune only children seem to know, Ethan remained frozen in place, soaked to the bone but burning inside, whispering her name like a prayer to the past. Luna. Ethan remained crouched on the wet sidewalk, Luna's name echoing through his mind like a bell tolling in a cathedral of memory. His breath caught somewhere between disbelief and destiny. And as she turned to skip away toward the corner, something in him surged forward, dragging him out of paralysis. Not as a CEO or a businessman, but as a man chasing a vanishing thread of the past. He stepped closer, voice trembling. "Where did you get that bracelet?" And the little girl paused, looking up with rain-kissed lashes, her lips curling into a trusting smile as she replied softly, "My mommy says it's special. She said it belonged to an angel." And though her answer was innocent, it pierced Ethan's chest like a dagger, because the word angel was exactly how his sister used to describe their late mother. And now that same word was being used to describe the very woman he thought he buried in ashes. He swallowed hard, trying to stay composed, every nerve buzzing like an alarm, and asked, "What's your name, sweetheart?" And the moment her voice answered, "Luna? Luna Blake." His knees nearly gave out beneath him, because the surname, his surname, was confirmation his soul wasn't prepared for. His mind raced. Blake, Luna, Bracelet, the eyes, the curls, the timeline. It all aligned with the painful pieces of a puzzle he'd locked away long ago in a room labeled "Never Open Again." He crouched lower, eye level with her now, hands trembling, and asked with a breathless whisper, "Do you know your daddy's name?" But Luna's brows furrowed as she shook her head and shrugged, replying with surprising clarity. "Mommy said he was rich, too busy to care about babies." And Ethan's jaw clenched as guilt, confusion, and fury tangled inside him like a storm. Who told her that? Why? And why had he never known she existed? His sister had never said a word about a child, and the thought of her going through pregnancy, birth, and escape alone shredded him from the inside. Luna tugged his sleeve, noticing his silence. "Are you okay, mister?" And he nodded quickly, blinking away emotion, struggling to act normal when nothing in his world felt normal anymore. She began walking again, her pink frock swaying as she stepped through puddles, and without thinking, Ethan followed, stepped silent behind her as though afraid reality might evaporate if he moved too fast. She led him around the corner, past old brick walls and overflowing trash bins, into a quiet back street where a tiny bakery sat tucked between rusted buildings, its front window glowing faintly through rain-streaked glass. The sweet scent of fresh bread mingled with the damp air. But it wasn't the aroma that stopped Ethan cold. It was the woman he saw through the frosted glass, standing behind the counter with a weary grace, her hair tied up loosely, apron stained with flour, but her posture, her profile, her face, older, thinner, etched with survival, but undeniably familiar. It was Julia, his sister, the one who died. His lungs emptied at once, disoriented by the impossible, and his fingers curled tightly into fists as if anchoring himself to something real. Her eyes met his through the glass for only a second before she quickly looked away, her hands fumbling with a tray, her face hardening, not in surprise but in recognition, in dread, and that single moment told Ethan everything. She knew he was alive, she knew who he was, and she had chosen to disappear anyway. Luna reached up and pressed her tiny palm against the window, her reflection melting into her mother's silhouette, and turned her head slightly to whisper, "She told me not to talk to rich men. They might take me away." And the weight of that sentence crushed Ethan like a collapsing ceiling. Who had Julia been running from? What kind of life had she been forced into, where even kindness was feared? His heart throbbed with urgency, with the desperate need to get inside, to speak, to hold his sister and shake her for answers, to protect this child from whatever shadows they'd lived under. But something about Luna's tone, innocent yet rehearsed, froze him. It meant she'd been told this before, maybe often, and it meant danger wasn't just a memory for Julia. It was still alive, possibly watching. Ethan's eyes scanned the quiet street, suddenly hyper-aware of every stranger, every vehicle, the sense of something unseen tightening around them like a noose. The bakery's bell chimed as a man exited with a brown paper bag and glanced too long at Luna before walking away briskly. And Ethan's instincts kicked in. This wasn't just about reunion or shock anymore. This was about protection, urgency, truth. He looked back at the bakery and saw Julia's eyes now locked on his, haunted, pleading, almost warning him to walk away. And for a moment, he considered it, considered retreating to the comfort of ignorance. But one look at Luna, tugging her jacket tighter around herself, that heirloom bracelet catching the light again, and he knew there was no going back. This was his blood. This was his chance to rewrite the past, to face the secrets he never asked for, but was now bound to. And as Luna opened the bakery door and slipped inside, disappearing like a memory returning home, Ethan stood outside in the rain, soaked but burning with questions, betrayal, and a vow forming silently on his lips. He would find out everything, and he would never let her go again. Ethan pushed the bakery door open with a storm behind his eyes, the warmth of the tiny shop clashing with the chill seeping from his soaked suit, his heart pounding louder than the bell that rang overhead. Julia stood frozen behind the counter, flour-dusted hands trembling, eyes wide as they locked onto his. And Luna, blissfully unaware, twirled near the shelves of cupcakes, humming to herself as if the tension didn't slice the air like glass. Ethan stepped forward, voice low but shaking with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me mourn you for 6 years?" But Julia immediately stepped in front of Luna, her arm out like a shield, her entire body taut with fear, whispering a broken, "Please, Ethan, don't make a scene." And though his instincts screamed to demand more, he caught the desperation in her eyes, the way her breath hitched like a person drowning in silence for far too long. "Julia," he said, more gently now, and the sound of her name from his lips cracked something inside her. Her legs gave slightly, her hand reached for the counter, as if the truth had finally become too heavy to carry alone. "I had no choice," she whispered, voice dry, eyes glassy. "He would have killed me, and maybe her too." Ethan's breath caught as she continued, each word like a knife through the fog of his confusion. She told him about the man she once loved, who became a monster behind closed doors, how she discovered she was pregnant and feared for their safety, how the threats turned into bruises and the bruises into promises of destruction. She told him of the night she set fire to her own trail, using a car crash, a planted ID, and the lie of death to escape his reach, vanishing into a life of fear, scraping by as a baker under a false name, raising Luna in shadows, with only the heirloom bracelet as a thread of the past she couldn't bear to cut. Ethan staggered back a step, the walls seeming to close in, his chest a cage of fury and sorrow, as he realized he had mourned someone who never stopped breathing, had walked this earth all those years without knowing a piece of his heart was still out there, hidden in plain sight. "You should have come to me," he said, not in anger, but in anguish. "I would have protected you." But Julia shook her head, tears finally spilling. "I didn't know who I could trust, and if he found out I had family, he would have come for you too." Ethan reached for Luna gently, brushing a curl behind her ear as the little girl smiled up at him with innocent eyes that hadn't yet learned the weight of their family's history. "You don't have to run anymore," he whispered to Julia, his voice steady with newfound purpose. "I'm not letting her grow up in fear. No one will ever hurt her, not while I'm alive." Julia's lips parted to respond, but then the bell above the door didn't ring, and still her eyes snapped to the window, pupils shrinking. Ethan followed her gaze to see 2 men in black suits standing across the street, eyes hidden behind sunglasses despite the gray skies, their posture too casual to be casual, their presence like vultures waiting to swoop. Julia's hand flew to Luna's shoulder instinctively, pulling her back, her knuckles white, her voice breaking into a whisper, meant only for Ethan. He's still watching us. He never stopped. Ethan's jaw clenched as every protective instinct surged through him like wildfire. And for the first time in years, business empires, boardrooms, and billion-dollar deals felt meaningless compared to the fragile safety of the child standing inches from his knees. He stepped between Luna and the window, shielding her with his body as Julia ducked behind the counter, pulling out a worn emergency bag hidden beneath the register, a habit clearly practiced more than once. "We can't stay," she whispered. "Not now. If they saw you with us, it changes everything." Ethan's eyes burned with the weight of decisions he never saw coming, but he nodded slowly, then crouched beside Luna and asked, "Hey, do you want to go on a little adventure with me?" And she nodded happily, unaware of the stakes unraveling around her. The clock on the bakery wall ticked louder with every second as the two men remained unmoving across the street, one speaking into a phone, the other watching the entrance like a hawk. Julia gathered Luna's coat and Ethan reached into his inner pocket, pulling out a sleek card and handing it to her. "This is my private security firm. I'll have them here in minutes." But Julia shook her head again, fear now etched into every movement. "No more firms, no more tracking. He knows how to get around all of it. We disappear now, or he'll make sure we never do again." Ethan had built companies, outwitted rivals, faced global scandals, but never had he faced something so personal, so raw. The clock kept ticking. The men kept waiting, but Ethan had already made his move. And this time, he wasn't playing defense. He was about to fight for blood, for truth, and for every broken piece of a family that deserved to be whole again. As soon as Julia and Luna were safely in Ethan's private residence, a guarded penthouse wrapped in glass and silence high above the city, Ethan disappeared into his study like a man possessed, tearing through legal files, private intelligence reports, and surveillance dossiers with the urgency of a brother chasing justice. His fingers trembling as name after name connected the dots of the hell his sister had endured alone. Every record he uncovered painted Julia's ex-husband as more than a monster. He was a predator cloaked in power, a cunning businessman whose conviction for fraud and abuse had only scratched the surface of his depravity. A man whose network still stretched like a rotting vine through shady investors, corrupt officials, and offshore accounts. Ethan's fury mounted when he learned that Luna had never been registered. No birth certificate, no hospital record, no school ID. An invisible child in a system designed to forget the ones who needed protection most. This meant she had no legal identity, and in the eyes of the law, no rights if her father ever came knocking. Julia's fear hadn't been paranoia. It had been prophecy, and Ethan felt sick knowing he hadn't been there to stop it. That night, he returned to the living room, where Luna slept curled against Julia's lap, a blanket around her like a soft shield. And though Julia looked up with tired, wary eyes, Ethan spoke with absolute clarity. "You're both coming with me. Now." There was no debate. He wouldn't let them vanish again. Within the hour, his driver pulled into a secure black sedan, and they slipped into the night, aiming for a safe house in upstate New York. Rain streaked the windows, and Luna hummed quietly in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the war unfolding around her name. Julia sat beside her, clutching her daughter's hand, while Ethan watched the rearview mirror like a hawk, each vehicle behind them examined with suspicion, until it happened. A screech of tires, a thud of impact, and the world tilted as a black SUV slammed into their rear bumper with brutal force, sending the car skidding sideways across the slick road. Luna screamed as Julia wrapped her arms around her, shielding her tiny body while Ethan's instincts ignited. His arm locking across Julia's chest as the second hit threw them violently forward. Glass shattered, metal groaned, and then everything stilled in a dizzy, terrifying quiet. Ethan's head throbbed, his lips split, but adrenaline surged as he kicked open the door, dragging Julia and Luna from the wreckage just seconds before another SUV pulled up and masked men jumped out. He shoved them behind a guardrail and turned to face the attackers, fists clenched, ignoring the blood dripping from his temple. Before they could reach him, his backup arrived. Two of his private guards, guns drawn, shouting commands that scattered the masked men like roaches under light. Their plan disrupted, but their message clear. We can reach you. We are watching. At the hospital, white walls smelled of antiseptic and consequence. Luna slept in a small bed under soft lights, a cartoon playing soundlessly above her, while Julia sat beside her, silent and pale, her face streaked with dried tears and ash from the crash. Ethan stood across the room, hands still bandaged, unable to stop replaying the look on Luna's face when the SUV hit. Her trust, her fear, her unspoken plea for protection. Julia looked up finally, then slowly stood and crossed to him, her shoulders trembling as she reached out and took his hand in hers, for the first time since they were teenagers. Her grip shaky, but real. "I never stopped trusting you," she whispered, voice breaking under the weight of years lost. "I just stopped trusting the world." And Ethan, with his heart splintered into 1,000 truths, nodded once, knowing those words carried more apology than any letter could. He squeezed her hand gently, whispering back, "Then let me build you a new world." And for the first time, Julia didn't pull away. Hours later, as dawn crept in, with soft peach light spilling across the hospital room, Luna stirred and rubbed her sleepy eyes, then blinked up at Ethan, who had stayed awake all night beside her bed. "Uncle Ethan?" she asked, her voice small. "Can I stay with you forever?" And Ethan, without hesitation, smiled through swollen lips and whispered, "Not just forever, for always," sealing a silent promise written in blood, in loyalty, and in the unbreakable bond that not even betrayal or time could erase. In that quiet hospital room, among bruises, truth, and scars, a new family was born. Not perfect, not healed, but real, and determined to fight for the light that had nearly been lost. After that fragile morning in the hospital, Ethan moved swiftly, no longer as a CEO controlling a corporate empire, but as a brother reclaiming what fate tried to steal, a protector wielding every ounce of power, money, and influence he possessed to dismantle the life of the man who had nearly destroyed his sister. He brought in federal investigators, exposed years of hidden abuse, reopened sealed files, and used confidential leverage to ensure that Julia's ex-husband was not just watched, but indicted, this time permanently. The court dates were swift, and with Ethan's legal team presenting indisputable evidence of danger and fraud, custody rights were stripped, passports flagged, and restraining orders enforced so heavily they could have been carved in stone. For the first time in years, Julia walked down a sidewalk without glancing over her shoulder, and Luna, now officially registered with a new name and a birth certificate bearing Ethan's signature, skipped freely without fear. But while the law offered safety, it was the quiet healing that changed everything. Moments in Ethan's penthouse where Julia laughed again, her eyes softening, her voice lighter, as though some invisible chain had finally snapped. Ethan watched her from across the kitchen island, pouring coffee like he wasn't the richest man in New York, but just a man in love with a second chance. Their conversation shifted from memories to dreams, from pain to possibility, and though they never said the word love out loud, it swirled between them like music waiting for lyrics. Luna thrived in their new rhythm, her drawings taped to Ethan's office wall, her tiny shoes lined up next to his polished Oxfords. And one morning as sunlight streamed through the massive windows of his 40th floor office, Luna danced into the room wearing a sparkly tiara he'd surprised her with, dragging a glitter-filled wand and declaring proudly, "I'm Princess Luna now." Ethan chuckled, leaning back in his leather chair, completely enchanted. Then she twirled, pointed her wand, and with a grin only a child could wear, asked, "Uncle Ethan, why don't you marry Mommy so we can be one big sparkle family?" The words struck like lightning, and silence followed, except for the flutter of papers caught in the breeze from the vent. Julia, standing near the door with a coffee mug in hand, turned crimson, laughing nervously as she said, "Luna, don't be silly." But Ethan's eyes never left hers. His expression shifted from surprise to something deeper, something resolute. And then slowly, without drama, without speeches, he rose from his chair, reached into the drawer and pulled out a small velvet box he'd kept for years, unopened, waiting for a moment he never thought would come. He dropped to one knee, not in some extravagant performance, but in reverent stillness, opening the box to reveal his late mother's ring. The same one Julia used to try on when they were children playing pretend weddings in the attic, long before the world stole their innocence. Because, he said, voice thick, eyes locked on hers, I've already lost you once. I won't lose you again. Julia's lips parted, trembling, and tears welled up without warning, her hands covering her mouth as Luna squealed, clapping her hands and spinning in joy. Days later, under a sky painted with lavender dusk, they stood in a hidden garden behind Ethan's estate, soft string lights glowing above them, like stars that had chosen to stay a little longer, just to witness something pure. Luna scattered rose petals with serious ceremony, her tiara slightly crooked, while Ethan waited beneath a trellis wrapped in ivy and jasmine, his suit tailored but his heart completely open. Julia appeared at the end of the aisle in a simple ivory dress. No veil, no diamonds, just honesty and love wrapped around her like silk, and with each step she took, the ghosts of the past seemed to fade behind her. When they met beneath the flowers, neither of them spoke at first. They just breathed, alive in a moment that defied logic, time, and pain. The officiant asked the words, but it was Ethan's eyes that answered. And when he said, I do, his voice carried not just a vow to love, but a promise to protect, to restore, to never let silence or secrets steal their family again. Luna cheered as the kiss sealed more than a marriage. It sealed healing. It sealed a home. And it sealed a broken story that had finally rewritten its ending in love. And when they danced that night under the stars, barefoot on dewy grass, laughter echoing into the dark, Ethan realized he hadn't just married a woman. He had chosen family, chosen forgiveness, chosen to believe that sometimes the people we lose come back to us not in the ways we expect, but in the ways we need most. And this time, nothing, no man, no fear, no past, could take them away from each other again.